So you found yourself wanting to make a fuckload more money. That's a great place to be at. And if you get stuck with having an organic only traffic source, listen, that's great, right? It's awesome to have that type of deal flow. That's why you focused on it for as long as you have. It's grown month over month, year over year. I mean, let's be honest, it's a tremendous asset to have that you've built, you've spent a lot of time on. But what you recognize is paid advertising is more like nitrous oxide being injected into the engine of a fine supercar. It just makes it fucking rip a whole lot faster. And it's very important to note, you're absolutely right in thinking that. Paid advertising typically generates a faster speed to the revenue that you've likely climbed your way up to now. So here's the moral of the story. In this video in particular, I'm gonna be discussing the best ways to transition from an organic only couple $100,000 or couple $1 million a month business who wants to crack that next $1 million a month. I've got you in this video. We've seen this time and time again. We've helped people through this time and time again. I'm gonna go through the specific things that you need to make sure you execute to make the transition successful. And I'm not talking about going from organic to paid only. I'm talking about introducing paid traffic to what you do so you can benefit from everything that paid advertising provides. So without further ado, my name's Jeremy Haynes. All we talk about around here is hitting $1 million months. Of course, there's no income claims associated with that. A majority of you sitting here shouldn't even be fucking watching this. This is only for the people that are at a couple $100,000 a month, that are trying to hit their first $1 million a month, or for the people already at $1 million or a couple million a month trying to tack on the next $1 million a month. So again, welcome in, but no income claims, no earning potential. Everything here is just for education and entertainment purposes. No implied earning potential from any of this stuff. So if you're new to the channel, welcome in. That's all we talk about. And of course, if you're already a subscriber, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you. Without further ado, another banger. Let's dive in. So first thing I want to make really clear, paid initially is going to suck in all kinds of ways. So the ways that it sucks, this is a big reason that the people who have tried paid advertising that are used to organic only fail and stop and then revert back to doing organic by itself, because they're either not aware that they're going to come across these things, they deal with them for too extended duration of time, and therefore they can't endure it any longer. They just don't have the right frame going into it. So the ways that paid can suck, here's the first one. Okay, the overall traffic is just going to be colder. Typically, when you get started with paid advertising, you have something that's called a warm audience. So you likely are aware that you can do this, but just for making sure that you're clear on what it actually means, I'm going to articulate it to you. A warm audience is very simple. First of all, you could do 180 days worth of web traffic. Okay, and you have to obviously have your pixel on the website from your ad account. If you don't have that, then you don't get the benefit from that audience. If you've had your pixel on your website, even if you're not doing paid, all that traffic still accumulates and becomes retargetable. In the instance that you have Instagram, Facebook, you can also do this on TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn allows you to also do the same thing. You have the opportunity to retarget all of your social interaction. And social interaction comes in different forms. So let me articulate those to you. First of all, you can do all these for 365 days that I'm about to articulate. You have people who sent a DM. You have people, and obviously it doesn't apply to YouTube, to be clear. You have people who sent a DM. You have people who saved posts. Specifically to YouTube, you have people who watched specific videos. You could do that on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and TikTok as well. But YouTube also allows you to have playlist viewers that you get the opportunity to retarget and put into a specific bucket. Okay, save posts, profile visits. In addition to that, we have specific post interaction, and then we also get the opportunity to do people who follow you, of course, or like your post, like your pages, etc. And then in addition to that, we have the buttons on the ads themselves, which obviously you're probably not going to have initially when you first get started, but you want to create it anyway because it becomes a retargeting audience. So outside of that, you also have all of your customer lists that you can upload. So this would be email lists, just lists you have in general that have like email, phone, first name, last name, etc. And those you can do indefinitely. There is no technical time frame in terms of your ability to retarget those. But all the social interaction stuff, all that, to be clear, is typically going to be 365 days. And then you also have video views. So video views are pretty cool. You can do 3 seconds, 10 seconds, and then they go up to percentages after the 15-second threshold. So you have 25%, 50%, 75%, typically 95%. And then in addition to that, you also have 100%. Very important to note, if you're gonna retarget short form content, make sure to do higher view thresholds. If you're gonna retarget long form content, you get the benefit of doing shorter view duration thresholds. Also, one very important note, pretty much everything above this red line is a literal warm audience. Video views can be a little colder. I just want to point that out. So if you launch initially with this entire list for a warm audience, just to be clear, you potentially want to remove video viewers unless you have very high view thresholds factored in. Super important pro tip. Just time and time again from testing to be a little more articulate on that, we've just seen that they can overall be colder, much colder in comparison to all these other warm interactions. So once you get the actual audiences created, okay, this is called a warm audience. So the warm audience is very important as a starting point because they're a little more forgiving since they have some familiarity bias with you. They might not have a lot, but they have some familiarity with you. And as a result of that, they're typically gonna be a little more responsive. And again, they're a little more forgiving. I can't stress that enough. Most of the big reasons that people stop trying paid advertising when they're transitioning from organic to paid, very simple. The sales team just constantly is saying like,
hey, these leads are too cold, like they're not ready to buy, they're too early in the sales process.
So very important to note, the other big way that this whole thing can really suck is just sales team performance is gonna be ass. It's just gonna start off so bad in most instances, regardless of enthusiasm, regardless of optimism levels going into the whole thing. It's just kind of a matter of fact. I've seen it so many times over. The main thing that you have to understand with what you're gonna pick, this is also typically something that can suck, is you pick the wrong conversion mechanism. So usually whatever you have working on your organic side of things is what you want to roll over to paid advertising. So as an example, like I'll use the Instagram guys who are constantly making posts trying to get some virality, maybe doing shout out campaigns, and they're driving traffic to their DMs in most instances in whatever specific mechanism they're getting them there, they're getting people in the DMs. They have setters that are communicating back and forth with people. They're trying to get people on sales calls and trying to get people to buy. In that example, the best strategy to roll over to paid advertising would be DM ads, right? You can optimize a campaign to literally drive people into your DMs, okay? Wouldn't make any sense to just all of a sudden introduce a call funnel, you know? Would it make that much sense to just put your nuts on the table and do a challenge funnel for the first thing you're gonna do, you know? Whatever's working organically is what you wanna replicate with paid ads first. That's extremely important to point out. Okay. The other main thing, and this is also like a pro tip, this is something that you have to do, is you have to replicate the organic sales process with paid ads. So if you fail to do this, okay, you have to replicate the organic sales process via paid ads. Okay, you have to put some actual thought into this one, because if you don't, you're gonna fail. You have a very high probability to fail if you do not replicate the organic sales process with paid advertising. And so what I mean by that, you have to really look at like what's actually working. What are people doing that makes them buy, okay? The one thing that we see time and time again is there is an unknown amount of content consumption. Like all you and I know is that yes, like technically it's for sure happening. We know that undoubtedly, but how much content is consumed? Unknown. How long it takes on average for somebody to consume until they convert? You think you have an idea, but you probably don't. Okay, you're probably just operating on a very small amount of data that's made you conclusive about whatever things that you do believe. Okay, and again, just to point this out, you have general awareness about what works though, like you know it's content consumption. And as a result of that, when you start paid advertising, the worst thing that you can technically do is just straight direct response. Okay, because the content is what has driven the sales on the organic side of things. So why would you not replicate the organic sales process via paid ads by using content advertising strategies? So this is one thing that I've done for over a decade now. I've strategies. What you're about to hear about, I have literally created and spent so much money on seeing it work across not just info businesses, but across all types of high ticket product and service based businesses. It is highly effective, but you have to pick the right one. And there's so many that you can technically pick from. So it's very dependent upon what is actually working in the organic side of things right now to get somebody to convert. So I'm gonna give you a few examples and I'm gonna plug a few of my specific content strategies. And I have videos on my channel here going through all of these different strategies. I wanna be very clear in saying, obviously I go through them in excessive levels of depth inside of my paid programs, which you can find links for down in the descriptions. All my paid programs for everything I'm about to discuss has massive SOPs, links to literal content examples, ad manager demonstrations to show the technical setup of these specific strategies, budget breakdowns. And again, when you're inside of one of these paid programs, you can just tag me or anybody on my staff, or you can even tag AI Jeremy, and he'll tell you which specific content ad strategy is gonna be best for you. We'll even look at your content and try to give you some general perspective on if you're doing the right things or the wrong things. We even have softwares we've developed and created leveraging AI, all of my training material, and thousands of examples from people who have executed these strategies to help you come up with the content ideas for some of these strategies that I'm about to talk about. So just keep that in mind in the instance that you feel unsatisfied with what you specifically find here on YouTube, or you feel like you just can't execute it. Very important to note, that'd be the time to just consider one of our paid offers. So without further ado, let's just continue on. A few things, okay? The very first ad strategy I ever came up with, it was called the Venus Flytrap. And again, you'll find a whole video breaking down the original Venus Flytrap on this channel. Eventually, I came out with the 2.0 strategy, which was actually earlier in this specific year. I found a lot of effectiveness with the 2.0 strategy in modern times, and I still find that myself and plenty of others have great effectiveness with the Venus Flytrap, the original one, not even the 2.0 one. But anyway, I digress. The point I'm trying to make is very simple. This leads with content. It leads specifically with a sequence of content. And then it hits people with the direct response ads. And that is a great example of replicating the organic sales process. I typically see time and time again in niches where they're not necessarily familiar with what you're gonna sell, or it's not a thought that's already in their head. A great example of when direct response can be very appropriate and some of these other content strategies that we'll talk about become better examples. You need to understand things that are already in people's head don't typically need framing content to hit them first before seeing direct response ads. They already have awareness, they already have thoughts and opinions about it, they already know about it. So simply put, you don't really have to spend the extra money and add the extra friction to the funnel by putting content first. You can just start with direct response and then follow up with content. You can do content after the direct response. So the Venus Flytrap specifically is best when you're typically doing something that people do not know about. That's a very important distinction of when I typically deploy this type of strategy. So I'll give you a great example. We had a new niche that came into existence in the most recent 2 years, and it was popping. This specific niche, to be fair to the niche, has been around for ages and ages, but it's just advanced to a point where it's so big. And it's a specific supplement, okay? Now, the supplement industry obviously been around forever, but you'll notice, like, why do supplements continue to sell at the level that they do time and time again? It's because new supplements and new research comes out that proves that, like, supplements you may have been taking are bad and, like, new supplements are better, or just a new supplement has some new specific benefit relative to what people care about. So I'll give you a great example of this with two things. Number one, methylene blue. And two, NAD. I'm not saying these haven't been around for a long time, but they've really been popping off in the most recent, like 1 to 2 years. Now, NAD is an example. You can do IVs, so therefore it's gotten into this like high ticket realm. You can also just do standard like oral supplementation of it. Methylene blue is typically a lot cheaper, but there have been people who have also been taking IVs of that. I just want to be really clear and pepper this in. I don't endorse literally either one of these things. I don't use either one of these things. These are just examples. Moral of the story is, as a result of people not necessarily having awareness about what these two things are, content promoting what they are first, making people aware of what they are first, demonstrating the benefits, and maybe even showing different people who use them. Because there's a lot of like really crazy people, like Tony Robbins. He uses NAD regularly. He wrote about it in his book called Life Force. In addition to that, methylene blue, that's actively being taken on a private jet by our new health secretary here in the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Moral of the story is, like, there's big people who are taking these kinds of things. But once people become aware of that, what does that do to their probability of actually buying it when the direct response ads inevitably follow up, right? There's a much higher probability of response. Comparatively, if people have zero awareness about what either one of these two things are, the direct response ads are probably not going to work that well. The direct response ads can have the awareness components, and the direct response ads can have the authority bias components of leveraging those two characters in the examples I provided. But if those same pieces of information are presented through content, even though it's being paid to distribute in front of them, they have a much higher probability to be responsive. So my point being, if I lead with content in that example, my direct response, even though I added friction prior to the direct response, is technically, arguably, going to be more cost effective, drive more buyers, have lower cost per purchases, etc. If I am going to use a Venus Flytrap or the Venus Flytrap 2.0 towards a demographic that's already aware of what I'm going to sell, all it does is just add additional cost. And I'm not probable to see a reduction in my cost per purchase compared to standard direct response. You understand? So those two differences are when this is typically most appropriate. So if you, as an example, are some niche creator and your specific offer that you've been selling organically for years has arguably worked best because of the amount of content that people have consumed to become aware of what you're selling, that could be a great example of a strategy that you could leverage. Now, to be clear, as I mentioned, sometimes it's best to follow, okay? To follow with content. So instead of doing it first, you do it after the direct response, okay? Big difference is relative to what I just discussed with the awareness, okay? So in this example, these would be strategies like my hammer them strategy. These would be strategies like the reverse fly trap as an example. And you could also just leverage what we call in my world content cycle bins. And these content cycle bins, these are typically just full of a bunch of content, and you can place them at different stages in your remarketing process and in your sales process to keep content in front of people and help with framing or dealing with objections relative to where they're at throughout the whole process. So anyway, I am a big advocate, and I'll give you an example here in this video of the hammer them strategy of that specific strategy right now. I absolutely fucking love the hammer them strategy. It's sick. So to be clear, you can use it in many different ways. Let's use the example that you have people DMing you, okay? As soon as they DM you, they're obviously talking to the setters, and the setters are then trying to book a call, and that's with a closer. And then from there, your closer might have a little bit of follow-up. Ideally, it's a one-call close and the person's doing a PIF. But if not, it's like you still got some follow-up in there. Typically what we'll do as soon as the person DMs us, okay? So the moment that occurs is we are going to run the hammer them campaign, okay? And we will keep the hammer them campaign on for the duration of the sales cycle. So in that example, if I have a lot of DMs, I could set up hammer them campaigns specific to each one of these buckets. But if I do not have a lot of DMs, then I'm gonna make sure the hammer them timeline is for the entirety of the sales process rather than just limiting it towards, okay, people who just DM'd us for the most recent 3 days or people who just DM'd us for the most recent 7 days. I'm gonna do it arguably for whatever the full sales cycle timeline is. That way the content that I put in front of people continues to support them throughout the sales process. When you have a lot of people DMing you and therefore you have a lot of people that are being set into closing calls, all you need to know is that when that occurs, it's smarter to create specific hammer them campaigns relative to where somebody's at within the sales process. And that content that you're gonna remarket to them caters to them based on where they're at in the sales process. So people who just DM'd that are still talking to a setter, they need more awareness content. They need content that helps show all the authority figures that do business with you, the results that people are generating with you, the features and everything that is a reason, like the urgency reasons, the motives, the buying motives, every single thing that you could think of that would be more appropriate to put in front of somebody at the beginning of the sales process, that's what you'd want to put there. And it can be short form content, it can be long form content, etc. So once you get to the point where the person gets on a closing call, there are different pieces of content that just make more sense. Sure, flood the person with a bunch of testimonials, but hit them with the specific things that are actually going to come up on the closing call. That's the most appropriate time to talk about things like making sense of the money, making a finance video, talking about why it makes sense to get funding when necessary. That's when it makes sense to talk about things like involving your partner in all the decisions you make and having them show up to things like calls. You know, there's a lot of indirect content that you can put in front of people during that specific part of the sales process that'll make a tremendous difference. Believe it or not, another really effective piece of content that you can put in front of people while they're about to PIF is your backstory, the information about the business in general, the people who work there, your customer service processes, your expectations. You can go through a lot more stuff that people will actually give a fuck about knowing after they've actually gotten to the point where they're having a closing call, not a setter call. You see? So at that point, once you reach a scale, break the hammer them campaigns down into specific buckets that are different. If I have somebody that had a closing call and they didn't buy, and let's say that I have 30 days worth of an audience where I could put a good couple hundred people in there. Again, I could use a hammer them campaign for that if I wanted to reach a specific frequency goal, because that's the big thing you have to understand about when we use the words around here, the hammer them campaign, that has a frequency target, meaning we're trying to put a tremendous amount of content in front of an individual in a tight time frame to justify its effectiveness. Comparatively, we have also what's called a content cycle bin, okay? And this example of somebody who had a closing call, failed to close, and let's say they're in a 30-day window after the closing call. That specific demographic, you could just call that a content cycle bin if you don't want to spend as much on that audience to keep content in front of them. Because when you're doing a content cycle bin, your only goal is to try to keep content in front of them, but you're not trying to achieve a specific frequency target where you put X amount of pieces of content in front of them in X amount of days. You're just in general trying to keep content in front of the person to keep them warmed up, make the responsiveness probability higher on your sales team. Now again, here's my point of why I say all this. Just back to my original conversation with you here today. When you transition from organic to paid, these little examples that I've just talked about, this is how you condense the sales cycle. This is really important. In the organic sales process, there is a lot of content consumption that occurred prior to the sales call and after the sales call occurred, or even right before the sales call. And that is what you have to replicate via these content ad strategies. That's one of the most important things. So just to reiterate, I just want to be really clear on this. You have to roll over the existing conversion mechanism strategy, the DM ads, the call funnels, the webinars, like whatever's actually working right now for you, you have to roll that over via paid ad, okay? Ideally, you start with warm audiences. I'm going to talk a little bit about cold audiences here in this next part of the video, but let me be clear, you ideally start with warm audiences, okay? But keep in mind, really, really good tip, okay? You will not be able to scale into your warm audiences unless your warm audiences are fucking huge, okay? And in addition to that, let's say like you're a big YouTuber and you don't do really anything on Instagram or Facebook. Well, you're obviously only gonna be limited to remarketing to people on YouTube and search engine ads and display ads through Google AdWords because all that audience didn't correlate to being able to retarget them via the warm audience insights, these audience types that I've given you over here to use. That's not gonna be available to you if your entire audience is on one channel and you're gonna attempt to run ads on another. You see? So you also have to consider the ad channel that's most appropriate for you is probable to be the one where your audience actually is retargetable. Really important distinction to make. So when we look at the replication of the organic sales process via paid ads, usually it involves all these content ad strategies that I've discussed. And by the way, there's many others. Outside of the ones that I've discussed here, we have the Forester as another example of a phenomenal content ad strategy. We also have a very scaled ad strategy, but this typically wouldn't be best for when you're first getting started. It's called the Harvester. It involves multi-stage content cycle bins, huge cold audience types. It's typically a mass market strategy is what it's best for. We also then have the Tornado. The Tornado is awesome. The Tornado actually has the hammer them within it, but it's kind of like the Forester campaign, just a little different than it. And as I mentioned, it also involves the hammer them strategy. And I think there's actually several others that I have too, but these are the ones that are coming top of mind right now. Anyway, point I'm trying to make is if you want to have, and this is where most organic to paid audience people, they fail, they have an issue with the sales cycle and they have an issue with the sales team feedback, okay? So the hammer them strategy is one component of what we call back-end selling systems. So typically, and by the way, if you haven't noticed this yet, let me just point this out. You obviously are learning a lot of shit that you're gonna have to do that you don't do now. And that's a big difference. That's typically what makes paid advertising work, are all these little things that I'm talking about. And there's plenty more little things that actually support the process and stack the probabilities more in your favor. And I'm gonna try to discuss as many of them with you right now as I can. So anyway, let me go into this next one, back-end selling systems. So it's really made up of 4 key things, okay? The first one are confirmation page best practices. So after somebody typically does something, that's when their interest is generally the highest to consume a lot of content. So when you look at getting as much information in front of somebody that you can in a tight time frame to shorten a sales cycle, confirmation pages are a great place to start. We'll typically put these things, we call them breakout videos. If you typically embed YouTube videos onto the confirmation page, like it can have effectiveness, but I don't know, it's just not interpreted the same as videos that are made specifically for the confirmation page. And you can listen to what's happening in the sales process, hear out what your salespeople are bitching about, they have to talk about, or that people don't know, and work it into the confirmation page. The illusion of paid advertising is that most of the consumption occurs on the front end, and then people should just come through to the qualified call ready to buy. That's just not how it works. Usually on the front end, people are in what we call scanner mode, and what they're looking for is this right for me, is this not right for me, and they're trying to justify the effort and energy they're expensing to either continue or just leave. And as soon as they make the conclusion like, oh yeah, this is for me, sure, like maybe a few of these people, it'll be a minority for sure, will consume some of the VSL and like passively scroll on the page that you've built for them. But most of the real consumption, like the high intent consumption that'll actually stick and have an influence on the sales process, happens on the back end. So that's why we call these back end selling systems. They just have tremendous effectiveness. So moral of the story, confirmation page best practices, all these breakout videos, they're all just simply put like Q&A style question videos where, okay, this is the thing I want people to know. I'm gonna put it into a little 1 to 5 minute video, bam. And we have some of these pages as an example that have like 19 videos on it, as crazy as that sounds. We'll typically include some testimonials on these pages as well. Again, one of the benefits of being in our paid programs, which you can find links for down in the description, we have an entire SOP with a fuckload of examples, and we also have a software we created to help you generate the actual confirmation page ideas. So we have an entire SOP We obviously have an entire training vault on everything in back-end selling systems, by the way. In terms of which offer might be best for you, let me just point that out real quick. The inner circle is for rich people that are trying to get a fuckload richer. Master Internet Marketing is a great place to train your staff on like highly technical marketing skills and strategies. It's a great place to train yourself if you only want a one-time price to offer from me. That is great. We update it typically annually, sometimes every other year if there's just not a lot to update on the marketing world. But it's a very active community, has access to AI Jeremy. And again, it's a great place to train yourself on technical digital marketing skills and strategies. One-time price. Whereas the inner circle, there's minimum income qualifications you have to meet. There's commitments in terms of time frames. It's a monthly payment or you can pay annually for it if you prefer. Moral of the story, that's for rich people trying to get a lot richer. So it's not for everybody, but moral of the story, it's a great place and it has higher levels of information. So we talk at a more advanced level in there because obviously we're only talking to people who are already above a specific income threshold. This is typically where the people join in that are already at $1 million a month or plus. Also where the people who are at a couple $100,000 a month join into. Whereas yeah, we still get people like that, believe it or not, to join into the Master Internet Marketing program. But we get a lot more people in there that are like agency owners and marketers, or again, just people that are trying to train their staff to it in a very cost-effective way. So keep that in mind when you're looking in the links. Okay, there's 3 other things that are part of the back-end selling systems besides confirmation page best practice. Number 1 is what we already discussed above with the hammer them strategies. And by the way, there are videos on my YouTube channel here that you can go and watch that are specific to the hammer them campaigns. I believe I have a playlist on my YouTube homepage that's called propaganda campaigns, and that'll discuss a lot, both in-depth tactical videos like showing you examples of content that would work for it, and videos going through like how you'd set it up. So again, the hammer them campaign specifically is a big part of the back-end selling system. Because here's the cool part about the hammer them campaign. People don't opt out of watching content, right? You'll have whatever email rates you get. You'll have whatever responsiveness you get to salespeople manually reaching out. You'll have whatever consumption you get on the content that's on your confirmation page. But at the end of the day, the content that you just paid to distribute in front of somebody and keep it there in front of them prior to that key conversion event occurring, like a call or a webinar or just going through the DM process, it has so much effectiveness and consumption, and it also establishes a really strong familiarity bias, which has a tremendous effect on people's willingness to buy in a shorter time frame because it heavily influences trust. So anyway, moral of the story, the hammer them campaign is a very critical part of this process. We also have what we call value dense email sequences. Again, we have entire videos here on this channel dedicated just to this specific topic. Value dense emails are awesome. We take a lot of what's covered inside of the confirmation breakout videos and we put it in the emails. I know this sounds a little ridiculous, but we can send up to 6 of these a day. We typically start with like 2 to 3, maybe sometimes 3 to 4. We look at the open rate trend. So if the open rate remains the same for each email, we'll add another email. As soon as we see the open rate drop, that's when we know we took it a step too far and we'll roll back to however many we had prior to where it dropped. Anyway, value dense emails are not just the basic, like, hey, make sure you show up. Of course, those are included in there too. But those ones are perceived as just exactly what they are, like reminders. They're pretty annoying and they have no value at all. They're essentially very one-sided. Value dense emails are things that when people read, it's shit that they'd actually want to know as it relates to potentially being a buyer for you. Right? These are like the genuine questions. That's where most people really get this wrong and don't see effectiveness with it, versus the people who get this right, they see upwards of like 30% lifts in show rates without exaggeration. The average lift in show rate, by the way, on all these back-end selling systems specifically is about 17% in terms of the lift. So anyway, highest is about 30, 32. And by the way, another crazy thing, you can see that level of lift from just implementing one of these things. Like we had a guy, he implemented, we actually had 2 guys do this. 2 guys implemented the back-end selling system confirmation page best practices, only the confirmation page. And they saw 32% and a 30% lift in their show rate. Pretty good. Anyway, moral of the story, the value dense emails and the confirmation page videos, like you have to actually discuss things that people give a fuck to know. Like you can't talk about things that people don't care about. You can't just say like,
oh, here's why your spouse needs to show up to a call. Like, oh, here's how to make sense of the money.
Like you have to actually make videos with the questions that people actually want to know from you, okay? And again, we have entire videos on YouTube dedicated to all these topics. The last thing are SDR Best Practices. And this specifically relates to a lot of the manual outreach that either the setters or the closers can do prior to the call that help with pre-call consumption. So when closers specifically are upset, this is typically the best time to leverage this and get them to actually do it. There's all kinds of things that they can do. And again, we have entire SOPs on this dedicated in our paid programs, but some of them, just to be clear, selfie videos. Having a closer with a list of all your company resources just loaded up with sales assets and trust assets, organized for them to be able to efficiently look and read an application and then look at the resource doc and send it off to a person. Here's the best part, and this is really important you understand this. The manual stuff that they do when sent from an iPhone specifically is interpreted as, okay, this person like really just spent the time to do this. When you attempt to automate this, although yes, it's efficient, it gets such a low response comparatively to being sent from an iPhone and like actually having a closer take the time to do some of these things, because you can tell a difference. I want to be really clear on that. So although yes, I want to be very fair in saying like there's these automated systems you could use, like yes, there's like these blue text message fucking things that can integrate to go high level in different CRMs nowadays. Tried and true, just time and time again. I don't want to be right, I just want to make money when I say this, okay? When those things exceed the impact on show rate that sending a fucking text from an iPhone does comparatively, I will absolutely and immediately start endorsing them wholeheartedly. But time and time again, I've seen that iPhones and manual texting from the setters or closers to the lead prior to the call has double-digit impact on show rates comparatively to what I've seen when people use like the blue text services or attempt to automate any of it. So that's the only reason I'm telling you what I'm telling you. So these four things make up Backend selling system, and they have a huge effect, very positive effect on show rate, close rates, shortening sales cycles. Because again, really important you understand this, the underlying intent of being able to replicate the organic sales process via paid ads is understanding the right information leads to action. The wrong information or no information leads to inaction, okay? So think about this, the organic sales process, there's just so much information that comes through content consumption, willful content consumption, okay? And at some point you say some hot shit that makes them say, this is for me, I'm buying from this guy, okay? In comparison, via paid ads, you generally lack the information or you put the wrong information, okay? So you either don't put any information or you put the wrong information, and therefore you just get a tremendous amount of friction on the sales call. It doesn't turn into a sales call, it turns into an education call, you get a long drawn out sales process, you're losing money. It becomes a tough time. So anyway, make sure you really focus on these two. Okay, I'm gonna give you another pro tip. This one's really awesome when it comes to budget. I have a few videos on my page. I think they're actually some of my most undermined videos because they're a tremendous mindset video when it comes to advertising and how it works. Ads are gambling, okay? It's just sophisticated gambling with better odds. That's the moral of the story. That's how I always describe it. It is. And when you go into the casino, okay, first of all, there's no crying in the casino. Second of all, you have to go into the casino with a specific budget in mind. You cannot walk into the casino with an undefined budget because you're gonna spend a certain amount of money and you do have a number. Simply put, when you spend a certain amount and you lose a certain amount and you're like, fuck this, I'm leaving the casino, right? It's better to know that number ahead of time so you can plan around the number, okay? If I only wanna spend like $500 in the casino, it's like to really have a good couple hours of fun, I'm not just gonna be able to sit down and go play like $500 blackjack games. I'm gonna have to change my approach for what I choose to do relative to my budget and like how long I wanna be there, okay? So a lot of the times, what makes the people who try to pivot from organic and include paid advertising into their revenue channels, they have no defined budget, they have no time frame in which they wanna survive in the casino, and as a result, like they just die out super quick because they don't have the right expectation. Like you have to go into it knowing what lowers your probabilities dramatically and what increases your probabilities dramatically of actually winning, okay? Here's a few of them. Number one, what lowers your probability dramatically is you not having a gambling budget, okay? Number two, having the wrong people. If you've got absolute fucking donkeys that you've hired to do this, okay, you're gonna have a bad time. And sometimes donkeys can present themselves as really sophisticated experts. Like I've seen time and time again, a lot of the people who come to us organically say things like, oh yeah, I've tried like 5 agencies and they've all fucked me. And it's like, to be clear, you can fuck yourself when you work with the right agency, but a lot of the times, yeah, the wrong agency can also fuck you. Like you have to have people who know that advertising is gambling. The best way, just in terms of like some random side tips here, and I have whole videos on this to tell if you're working with a shit marketer or not, by the way. But anyway, to pepper in a few of them here. If they don't do financial modeling, like if they don't demonstrate to you,
hey, we're gonna spend this much on this funnel, and like here's the worst case scenario statistics that we have to hit in order to turn that money into more money.
You're working with a fucking donkey, okay? They have to financially model everything out for you and demonstrate with math what makes the most sense to do. Another great way to tell is if they set the right expectations. Like this video is a perfect example of that. I'm sitting here telling you how the game works, okay? And yeah, you might not want to hear it to the length in which I'm describing it to you from the person you're going to choose to work with who's tactically going to execute this shit. But like, dog, they better set some clear fucking expectations of how this works, okay? They also need to have a strong willingness to get involved in departments like the sales department as an example, or like telling you what types of videos you need to film and saying hot shit like this that actually works with replicating the organic sales process via paid ads. Clear telltale that they're a fucking donkey and don't know what the hell they're doing is if you are, as an example, running call call funnels via organic and they tell you,
oh, let's run fucking DM ads over here.
Anything else other than what's working organically, again, donkey alert, you get what I'm saying? So anyway, the wrong people can absolutely fuck you. But let me articulate that other side too. You can work with the right people and still fuck yourself. Like I've had people that we've worked with where we'll get them literally hundreds of qualified sales calls. We'll hammer the fuck out of people with content. We'll implement all this stuff. And then the sales team sucks ass. Like they're terrible. And as a result of that, like we start saying like, hey, get on the sales team's ass. Like here's all the things you need to do. And they don't do any of them. And they don't have proper sales management. And they just don't have any willingness to actually do the things that are going to make the deal successful, right? There's only so much influence we can have in a deal. There's only so many places we can be at once. We do our job really effective. You got to do your job really effective too. Very important you understand that. So long story short, you can fuck yourself even if you are working with the right people is the moral of the story with that one, okay? Some other things that can really fuck you when you're going through this process here, and this is important to understand, okay? You have to be there for a lot more budget than you're likely willing to spend and for a longer duration of time than you're likely willing to spend it, okay? We have a client, he's been organic only for a long time. Okay, guy does a couple $1,000,000 a month organically with his paid offers. Now this guy wanted to get into paid ads and we told him his organic stuff was working best was webinars, live webinars. We were like, easy game, dude. Let's do live webinars via paid ads. So we start getting people to opt in. Every single webinar that this guy does weekly, we have to spend $25,000 for. Why? Because that's what we financially modeled makes sense with worst case scenario statistics. That was the minimum we had to spend. So in a month, the guy has to spend $100,000 plus commissions from sales that get generated, plus fees to the agency in that example, plus random software costs that come along, right? And he has to spend time on something that might not be profitable. So here's what ends up happening. The first webinar, break even. Second webinar, lose money. Made like $5,000 on the second webinar. Third webinar makes like $129,000. Okay, fourth webinar, back to like a little bit above break even. Nothing crazy, changed everything on that fourth one. And then from there, went on a month-long vacation. Didn't do anything for a month. Guy comes back, we start spending $25K a webinar again. First one, break even. Second one, $200,000 in revenue. Third one, $100,000 in revenue. Now we can start scaling, right? Think about this. That was over the course of 3 months because the first month was pretty much, the guy maybe pocketed like $20,000 in net after all costs. Okay. The second month nothing happened, but he still paid fees. He still paid recurring agencies fees. He still paid the recurring sales team costs. He still paid software costs, like just no revenue. So that eats into the first month's of revenue, supplemented by the organic revenue to be fair. Third month, right? Finally starts making money. That's 3 months deep and literally $300,000 in paid advertising costs alone, let alone the other tens of thousands of dollars that went towards all the other things I already described as costs. Okay. Think about that, right? Now, you don't always have to be that aggressive if the math indicates that you don't need to spend as much, or if you have a different funnel type that's going to be a little more relenting to you, where you don't have to risk as much per conversion event to make it work. As an example, you could spend realistically like 25 to 40K in a month on an entire month comparatively to a webinar where you're spending like 100K if you're doing them weekly. You have a lot less you need to spend. Everything's a little more like long and drawn out. Again, it's just a little more relenting, simply put. You have more time in between each sales call. You have more feedback that typically comes over that entire duration of time, rather than in a webinar we do them weekly, 4 different conversion events. We have 4 different iteration cycles that you can go through and improve things with. If I have sales calls coming in every day, I can technically improve 30 times in a month. I can improve every day that a sales call occurs. You see? So moral of the story is you have to understand, like, when I frame it as gambling, you have to have like a certain amount of budget that you're gonna pull from the organic revenue and just justify it as your paid advertising gambling budget. You have to. If you don't do that, you're gonna have a bad time, okay? If you don't do math, whether you work with somebody or not, do the fucking math, dude. Like, don't spend too little, okay? You have to endure for long durations of time. One of the things that we also typically see that really fucks people up when they try to transition from organic to adding paid, the time frame is so short, which is always so silly to me, because on our organic anything, like no matter what the channel is, it takes typically a long fucking time to build yourself up to the level that you have organically, where you're like actually making some serious fucking money from it, okay? And when you project onto paid ads that it's just gonna happen instantly, like I get the thought, that's how you might view it, but at the end of the day, what gets it to work instantly is everything in the paid advertising process fucking firing on all cylinders, okay? There's this video I did on my channel, and again, I talk about this in depth inside of my paid programs. I call it bottleneck analysis. When something doesn't work with paid ads, there's a lot more specific points within the marketing and sales process that you need to track KPIs for. Whereas with the organic sales process, typically you're only tracking like the back-end set of statistics. You might have an idea of like what video topics and themes are working best. You might have an idea which specific videos and which specific organic traffic channels are converting the best for you, of course. But like you really don't have nearly as many money numbers just visible to you as you would with paid advertising. Paid advertising comes with all the front end statistics that organic content production typically just doesn't. So moral of the story is there's different statistics and there's typically more statistics that you can look at. And you need to know like which statistic in particular has a lot of leverage for you in order to drive down your costs and increase your overall net margins that you're gonna produce. So long story short, everything I've discussed here today, and honestly, a plentiful amount more, increases your odds or decreases your odds dramatically that you're gonna be able to transition from organic to paid, okay? Again, I've always talked in this video specifically so far about warm audiences driving most of your initial conversions. Let's transition a little bit to cold advertising and then we'll close out the video. So cold audiences, this should be your ultimate goal, okay? This is where the real money is. This is typically where you get paid the most. And this is really what you mean when you say paid advertising, right? You know that your warm audience is limited based on how often you fill it back up again with all the organic activity that you do or do not do. I know a lot of y'all out there, like, you might not be as consistent as what you think you are. You know, you have periods of times where you fail to post, and as a result, like a whole month could go by and you get half of the audience filled up again. And those warm audiences that we talked about towards the beginning here of this video off to the right, this specific set of audiences, keep in mind, like it only lasts for a year and then they drop out. Every day somebody drops out from the 366th day that just passed. You understand? So you have to constantly fill it back up. Cold audiences are just always there, okay? But cold audiences, entirely different sets of lessons. They are entirely different. You have a lot of different rules, right? They're no familiarity bias at all, okay? These people don't give a fuck about you one bit. Your sales team is hey, these people are colder, and you have to implement every single thing that we talked about above in order to make cold paid advertising work, unless you just got a super hot offer and a large in-market demographic to sell to. There are, exclusions and exemptions where cold paid advertising can still hit tremendously hard. And I just want to be fair in saying, though, it's a completely different skill set. It's a completely different game. If I were you, I would start with warm audiences. And if you need to start with cold paid advertising audiences, I just want to be very direct in saying, yes, there's a tremendous amount of videos on this channel that are dedicated to helping with cold paid advertising audience topics. Just simply remember this out of all the things that you could know. It is a different rule set. It's not the same as warm audiences, not even close to the same as organic. It's very different. Totally different rule set applies to it, and you need to spend the time to actually master that. But when you actually look at cold audiences specifically and their potential, you're absolutely right to think and know with certainty that's where the big money is. That's where the true scale is. That's where you can spend into damn near indefinitely and not really have any issues. There's types of cold audiences that you can sell into that require you to change as you scale. But again, those are still huge audiences comparatively to your warm audience damn near any day of the week. So keep that in mind. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you're not a subscriber yet, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate you being here. Go check out some of the other videos on my channel. They're all bangers. They're all geared towards $1 million a month lessons. Again, nothing that we've talked about here in any way, shape, or form is an implied earning claim, or you don't really have any earning potential at all watching any of this stuff, to be clear. This is all just entertainment and education purposes. Thank you for being here, though. And of course, if you're already subscribed and you stuck around this far, hey man, you know what to do, right? Go get rich. All right, talk soon.